Yeah, no, I'm sure it will.
Which is
well.
pesky. Okay, so that's it there. Top and bottom. Okay, so let me just do this for a sec. Okay, just in case it moves, I can see where it is. Because I just know that the camera is zoomed into these 2 points, so then I can make sure I keep it in that zone. Okay, so once I've transferred it, what I do is I get a little smushy brush. Now you don't have to paint along with me, or you can. Were you the one, because I've done a few, you weren't the person that was telling me that you've drawn it twice and you're going to paint along with me and then keep the real one? You haven't done that, right?
I've got a smaller one actually, because I originally drawn it small and then I thought about it and I thought you probably won't want to do that, so then I've
oh no, well it doesn't affect me how you paint it, how big or small you paint it, but
so are you taking some of the
yes,
colour off now?
So you want,
and you just got the guidelines, right? I've got some of that putty stuff.
Because it's quite dusty when, like the and what will happen, it moves around a bit, but we don't need it this strong. You only need suggestions of it. Now on a pale flower, of course, I might take off even more, because once you start putting washes on, it can be a bit hard to remove. After about the second wash, it can be a bit hard to remove pencil. You can remove pencil even if you painted over it.
Right.
To about wash 2, and then after that it gets harder.
So I'm taking off some of the really dark bits where I've sort of...
And in the shadowy parts,
I've started drawing and then decided it was a bit wrong and then had another go.
Yeah, right. In the shadowy parts, you don't have to take it off as much, because you're going to paint over it, and it's lighter than what your shadows will be. But if there's any highlights, then that's when you do that even more. But for us, I think that will be fine, because it's kind of a mid colour, that our green. So okay.
Because I'm conscious that I've got no white, so it's so important to basically keep to retain some white. So that's again, I'm scared. I think I've got to be really careful.
Well, you do. White's important. Okay, so I'm going to make a wash of, I think I'm going to make a wash of green.
Okay. And you're going to use the sap green with anything else?
Yeah,
or just
yeah, for sure. So we're going to do sap green. What you've done washes before and so on, but so I'm going to use a sap green. I'm going to clean a tiny edge of my palette. Okay. And use a sap green. Make up a bit of it, because we're going to mute it down to that nice soft mossy green that our petal is. Actually, at this rate I should just pop it in the other.
So far you've just put sap green on that?
Yeah, it's just sap green for the moment.
Okay, yeah.
And then some of your that maroony magenta, muted magenta colour that you have. What was it? What was it called?
Oh, the permanent mauve?
Yeah, permanent mauve. Okay, so
right.
I've got...
Put a tiny bit of that in?
Yes, because we want to dull it down to a... I think we want to dull it down so it's more moss green rather than lime green.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I just need to see what... So actually it needs to be quite a bit. I mean, you'll need a bit of...
I'll dab that on, see what... Yeah, it's slightly darker. Are we going to use quite a bit of this? Should I...
Yeah, you can make up a little bit.
So I'll make that. almost like a grey colour now. Should I put a bit more green in? It's not.
Yeah, well,
It's so difficult, isn't it?
yeah, and what it is it'll be in a way a little bit about what your screen's like. I mean, you know, like what you can see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, mine is getting a bit more olively mossy, which is fine. It's not quite the moss green that we've got though. What are the colours you got? You got blue. What?
So I've got sap green. I've got lemon yellow
Yeah.
hue. I've got this blue green, and then I've got the French ultramarine and cobalt blue, normal ultramarine, and permanent mauve.
Oh, grab maybe the cobalt blue and the cobalt blue and your lemon yellow, and make that up. I think that will make a less olive green, and it will make it into a more warmer. A little cooler green, yeah. And we'll probably do a combination of the two. And in the shadows, we'll use that olive green that we just mixed up. And in the rest of it, we'll probably use the other green.
So that one and the cobalt blue. So 1, 2, 3, that blue.
Yeah, that's about. Well, that's a bit lemony. Let's see. That's a bit. It's not too bad there. Okay, so there we go. So that makes a really nice sort of mossy green, which I quite like. And so that cobalt blue and that lemon yellow make that green. You can actually buy that green already made up in a tube. It's called Terre Verte, and you may hear me talk about it because it's my new favourite green.
Right, okay.
But you can just make it up using those two colours. You don't have to buy the tube of it.
Yeah. Okay, I notice it's nice mossy green.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a sort of a moss green that's going towards the sort of cooler colours. Yeah, and a warmer green, so muted. They're both muted, so that's good. So that's what we want. And then, so now that I've got that done, let's see. This is my little testy. Let's start with. Let's see. We can just because it's sort of nice to warm up on areas that you can't go too far on, I think. Which is what I do. I always sort of
calm your nerves.
Yeah.
You on about the leaf?
No, I'm gonna do the stalk. But it is a little bit. Yeah, it is a little bit about sort of just starting where you feel you can't mess up anything when you're just sort of warming up, as it were. Where you're just sort of starting for the day or whatever. I always do that. So I don't normally do wet first, but I will. I'll just run. Well, this isn't my water brush. This is my regular brush, but it's got water on it, so we'll just wet that a little bit first.
Right, so wet the stalk.
Yeah, just because it's easy and nice. I won't do that on anything else really. I hardly ever wet my paper before unless it's a tricky colour. Like magenta can be tricky, it can be grabby, and sort of stay put when you and be less inclined to move around. So I often maybe wet the paper for that just to make it easier to do. And let's see, let's just run a soft wash all the way down it. It doesn't have to be too strong.
So you've used which colour there?
I used the we'll call it the moss green, shall we?
Okay. No, the darker one.
Well, I don't.
The one with the
No, not the sap green. Oh. Sorry, no, it's the one that you made up with the cobalt and the ultramar.
the one you first mixed.
No, the one you made up with the cobalt and the lemon yellow.
With the cobalt blue, right? And do I put that all over the store?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And now that's sort of wet, but we'll have to wait for it to dry just a little bit, but not too much. Like we just want the sheen off it. I'm just going to tidy up my edge a little. If it dries just a little bit more, then we can just strengthen up the one side with that shadow. While we're waiting for it to dry a little bit more, we can actually, still with the moss green, we can start filling in this area here that's quite clear as to what's going on. So I'm just going to paint in that sort of block of shadow that I see. And that's all I would start doing, is I would just go through and almost like...
all the dark bits?
Well, just start filling in shapes that I see. Yeah, so generally the dark bits. Because what you're doing is, whilst you're painting the dark, you're also leaving the light. So you're doing both. And it's almost like redrawing it, but you're just drawing it with your colour, obviously. So I'll pop that in there.
It's still fiddling with this straw, because I seem to have like a sort of darker edge on one side.
Oh, that's because maybe there was a lot of water in your wash, like your wash was quite watery. But which side have you got? Which side have you got? This side, is that the side that's darker?
On the wrong side, funnily enough.
Oh, it won't.
On the lighter side.
Right.
It's almost like an outline I've got.
Yeah,
Down
it's kind of pushed all your...
So I'm just trying to...
Why don't you leave that? Don't worry about it. No, leave it to dry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because later on what you can do, once it's fully dry and nice, you can get, if you have a little brush, or like I've got a little flat brush that I often use, and I will do that when things get sort of dried a little bit hard or something, I can run down the edge with it. And you may not see it, it depends how dark that is, because we've still got to add, this leaf here is darker, so it might work in with that edge of the depth of colour on this edge.
Yeah, true.
So,
I see what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, so don't worry about it just yet.
Almost like the back of the leaf.
Yeah,
the other side of the leaf.
exactly.
Right, so I'm going to do that little dark bit that you've just done then.
Now, if you find it a bit too hard to follow along and paint, well, you'll work out yourself whether you prefer to sort of watch a bit more, or maybe do a few bits, but watch. You've got the video that you'll be able to follow.
Yeah, how will I be able to see this?
What do you mean? You mean later?
Yeah.
I'll give you a link so that you can go to it.
Right. Oh, that's so good. Right.
So you can repaint it if you wanted, And then that way, because it's a bit hard to keep painting and looking up, and I'm painting and you've missed something, you can look down and look up and stuff.
I'm going to stop what I'm doing now, because otherwise I'm going to miss a lot of your technique. Or, just do tiny bits.
Yeah, or just maybe, if there's a piece of paper that, or roughly you had that design, then you could, you could write little notes on it, or...
Yeah. So you've just gone down the side of the stalk again to the right,
yeah.
A little bit darker, with the same colour.
With the same colour, because it was sort of, it's now dampish, right? And so you just wait for it to dry enough that it doesn't bleed too much, where it stays put, and you can just keep adding a little bit of colour to that. And it sort of blends itself almost too at some point, if it's just damp enough. That can be handy. And I've still got my pencil line there, but I will, once that dries better, I will take that out. You see? Yeah, so, and see there's a little line down here which is blurrier, which is softer in the picture, but I'm going to put it in, and it can dry quite hard because I would come in with that flat brush and blend it a little later. So I'm not too worried about that. You see? Okay, so if we went on, what I would do is I would just generally just start going around the whole painting and just painting in sort of the shadow and hence the light that I see. You can't paint
So like
light.
sort of halfway up, there's that dark piece, isn't it? Like a little eye in the middle. You'd start on that next, would you? You see the dark bit sort of halfway up.
Yeah, no, I'd start anywhere I feel comfortable. I mean, it's always just...
Anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, like if you feel like, oh, that's the darkest bit, I'll do that. And you can. If you feel like, just wherever you feel, you can go, oh, I know where that is. I know what that's doing.
Yeah,
That's what I would do. And you sort of... And what will happen is, well, you come along, you can do them, and it doesn't have to be super precise, and it doesn't have to be, the first wash is quite wishy-washy, really. It can be, you just need to sort of block in where those things are, and once you do that, interestingly enough, like, you don't really see it because you're just doing piece by piece, but then you look out later on and you can actually see the shapes and the colours and stuff. It's quite cool. But if I just quickly go around and just block in little bits, and as they dry, you can go through, especially down the bottom, and some of it's quite blurry in the photo, and that's quite nice.
yes.
I'd come in and I'd soften all that edge with my brush later. But that part around here will be quite soft, but up here will be quite, it's in focus quite a bit more. And in a way, this isn't the darkest part, this is sort of like a mid-tone, really, mid-colour that you're adding. It's not the darkest and it's not the lightest either. And this is also the bit where you sort of get a bit more familiar with your flower again, because you're sort of just going over it and looking at all the details that you possibly didn't notice before.
Yeah.
So none of these lines have to be super amazing or anything like that.
I like sort of organic things because, if you're painting a still life and it's an object that you know, there is a little bit of artistic license, isn't there, that you can get away with if you like.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, if your curve is not the same as mine, nobody would know, or the same as the flower, you know, it's all those things.
Exactly.
You know, you don't have to worry about somebody. And that's why, you know what, I didn't do portrait. I was thinking, what am I going to paint when I started painting? I was like, what, is it going to be landscape or whatever?
Portrait's a nightmare, isn't it? That terrifies me. Even still life drawing is so
Yes,
tricky.
or anything to do with a human, you've got to be so on it. Whereas with, you know, an apple is an odd shaped apple, nobody will notice that it wasn't round because, you know, you just get so many variations of things. And so I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to, you know, do that. It's so much easier. And landscapes didn't really appeal to me. Actually, working outdoors doesn't appeal to me. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, I have tried from still life, but that was why I found it very difficult with that artillery. I tried to do it without taking photographs, and then obviously even just during the day, once if it's particularly if it's not, it's a cut flower.
Yeah.
It very soon changes, doesn't it? And with the light, very difficult.
It does change.
Unless you're really, really quick.
Yeah, exactly. And so that does make for a little harder path. That's why I like photos. You know what you're getting. Nothing moves.
Yeah, no. I've never tried this like this before, and it's definitely something I'll take on board. But then it's getting that perfect photograph that I need to work on as well.
Yeah.
I'm surprised how hard that is.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, actually, well, that's the thing. What you do is, I guess you take them and then you could do a little thing where you try and paint from them, and then you'll pretty quickly realise what you missed, what you needed, what you don't have that you wish you'd taken, and that will, you know, you'll work out that way. You know, like, oh, I needed more close-ups of this or whatever. It's a bit of a puzzle, I find. I mean, this is the trickiest part, is just sort of doing this where you go back over what essentially your pencil lines and try and work out what you were meaning by some of them and where it is and stuff. This is quite time consuming, so you'll see me do some, and then what I think would be great would be we'll do, you know, as much as we can do for this session, and then, you know, for the next week or 2 weeks, you know, to our next one, you go through the rest of it, doing it all, because we won't get it all done in 1 hour, for sure. And then that way, you know, you can move on to stage 2 for the second one, and lesson, rather than trying to keep going on the first.
Yes.
But you'll see.
3, yeah.
And then you'll have a video.
And hopefully it'll be something that you'll like doing, and it'll be lovely to see how yours turns out.
Well, I don't expect it to be too tricky, but I mean, you never know. You never know. Well, it's just working on curves and things, and I quite like that. But at this point, it's just about trying to pick out the right sort of where all the little areas are. Yeah. And I tend to just paint with, well, if it was smaller, I'd paint with a smaller brush, but I do tend to just paint with this sort of one size brush, and I just use the tip that's the finest part for any little work, rather than getting a small brush out. it's kind of easier because you've got more wash on the bigger part of the brush, so you don't have to keep going back and forward to the palette. And if all these little wrinkles and crinkles, if some of them you don't get quite right, so long as it looks like a crinkle, it really doesn't matter. Or, you know, a little fold, or like we said, it doesn't. Nobody's going to know who they all were. See, some of my paint's getting lighter and lighter as I get further up, only because it's just less on the brush. But you can always come through and add a bit more. Oh, I haven't got a line here. Let's see, where does it go to? See, that's a problem sometimes when you haven't sort of finished it quite. You need to work out where it is. I think it goes down there. It's going to now. This is quite soft. And this part is quite sort of that out of focus part, which I quite like. I might not make it quite so out of focus as what's on here, but